Like Jeremy said, we'll hit some points on how the legislature decisions or outcome affect us directly. A lot of the budget presentation follows like previous years, just updated information. Starting out with our student enrollment. As you know, our student enrollment drives the majority of our revenue. We had a bounce back in 21-22. Have some larger classrooms, class sizes, and then also with COVID, we feel was a reason for that bounce back. And then this year, we're going to end around 2499. I think that was our enrollment count on June 1st. Just kind of point out, you know, we started last fall with some pretty big numbers. We were celebrating, just kind of cautious about that this fall when we look at our numbers, because every year they decrease as the year goes on. So next year we're projecting, even though we've got some larger classroom sizes graduating, we're projecting the same number as this year. And then 24-25 and 25-26, you can see those numbers go down a little bit. Again, we've got a large classrooms at the high school right now, and as those come through, on the backside, we're getting normal class sizes. So it's not, you know, our numbers are going down, and that definitely will affect our revenue. But if you look at previous, we're kind of getting back to where we were pre-COVID, you know, to some of those numbers. And obviously, those numbers can change too. I know Parkside is doing a little more to promote kindergarten registration and just trying to get people in our school district. Student open enrollment turned out well again this year. We ended up with a positive number of students that enrolled in our district from other residents that enrolled out. We ended up with a positive number of 28. Last year we were at a positive number of 37, but still can celebrate that positive number. And then 2 years ago, we're actually at a -5, so we've seen a nice bounce back at students attending our district. Some of the other demographics that we look at, Jeremy touched on the free and reduced counts that affects compensatory and some of our other revenues. You can see that big jump from last year to this year. And as Jeremy pointed out, a lot of that has to do with that Medicaid direct certification program that's continuing. Bill, you had mentioned the forms that need to be filled out. We'll push that like we did when we had free lunches before, but we didn't have that Medicaid direct certification back during COVID. That's been huge for us, and you'll see some of those numbers, how that affects. But you can see we're at 56% district-wide. Special education, student demographics, you can see just like previous years, those numbers keep growing. Went from 573 last year to 587 this year, and I don't suspect that changing at all for next year. Our minority student demographics, we usually put all the different languages up. It got a little long where you couldn't even read it because it was so big. So I just kind of broke it down. Our number did hold steady from last year to this year at 425, and I think that's going to be the effect next year. Jeremy and Beth do a nice job of looking at the numbers, looking at the different grades. How do we shift some of our EL teachers around, and do we need additional or not as many? And right now, with some shifting, we're good at the numbers we have. Staffing and class sizes. This is another thing Jeremy and I talked about during one of our meetings. I think this is kind of a celebration. You talk about open enrollment in and out. You know, I think one of the things that maybe families go to other communities is for smaller classroom sizes. And if you look at our numbers for next year, at least projected, we're looking at or below the numbers that the board has approved, with the exception of kindergarten, which we talk every year, which is borderline right at that 21-22, and that's where you guys added the kindergarten aides.
We also have paraprofessionals assigned to each kindergarten program as well.
Correct. Yep. So if you look at 1 through 8, all those grades are below the student classroom counts. Jeremy does a thorough job at looking, along with the administrators, looking at each class, what the number of sections we need, and visits with the board on that. But I think this is, those are really nice numbers to be able to go into next year, and hoping our enrollment goes up, but we'd still be within. So to break down now on our budget, going over the expenditures, our salaries, you know, so our EA is negotiating now. Their settlement is estimated in this, but some of our other non-certified that we had negotiated prior, we tried to get some of those wages up, and they were a little larger settlements than prior. But we're still sitting at right at that 5.36 salary increase. Last year it was 4.19. So if you look at the graph, it really, like every year, really goes in play. Benefits, we're projecting of around a 9% increase. Last year it was an 8.57. The majority of that is the board share of the health insurance, and then some severance estimates. I will say that both are very conservative, on the conservative side, but we have to kind of budget those in just to be prepared. On the board share of the health insurance, we're estimating an increase of $122,000 of that $632,000. You know, that's a hard one to do because we have a lot of new teachers coming in, and at this point we don't know if they're taking health insurance or not. And if they take family health insurance, it could be up to $10,000, $12,000 extra. So it moves the needle pretty fast. So we try to budget that in. Yeah, and just kind of a side note, we have approximately 280 staff on our health insurance right now out of 422, which is 64%. And the average increase for each person is $432. So it helps to attract, hopefully, employees to our district and retain them with our health insurance. Severance also, again, that's a conservative number, figured about $153,000. That's district-wide for qualifying. And just a reminder that we had an administrator retire, but her official retirement date isn't until July, so that's figured into this number. And then other increases in the benefits, obviously with our percentage, things like FICA, LTD, workman's comp, and TRA and PRA, those go up when the salaries go up. And then our TRA from last year to this year is going from 8.55 to 8.75, so there's an increase there. On our purchase services, you can see it's kind of a little roller coaster. Several things have gone on over the past few years. 1819 and 1920, we saw a spike. That was due to that safety and security project that we got the grant on, but that was under general fund. And so that's where you see the added numbers there. And then you'll see a decrease in 2021, 21, 22, 22, 23, and then 23, 24 kind of gets back into that normal level. I do want a side note, Jeremy talked about the BAR program and the grants that's available. We did budget in grant program at the middle, or the BAR program at the middle school, just in case we don't receive funding. So if we do receive the funding, we'll adjust that during our revised budget. And then supplies, this has dropped down. Some of it was due to our COVID, the PPE. We spent about $70,000 this year, and you'll say, why did we spend so much? There were funds available, and one of the allowances was for our AQ, or our HVAC filters, and so we purchased an extra year, and they're not cheap, so we got an extra year of district-wide filters on hand. And then also additional special ed COVID funds were available this year that we bought some supplies with. Capital expenditures, just wanted to touch on that a little bit. You'll see a big increase from 21-22 to 22-23, and then a pretty large decrease for next year. And I mentioned this to the board, not to get too deep into it, but GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, added what's called GASB 87, which recoded some of our leases, like our SMSU facility lease and Maytech lease, from purchase services down to capital expenditures, which skews things quite a bit. So that was the difference there. And then the decrease you're seeing in for next year, a lot of that has to do our 10-year agreement with SMSU on the track, which was $159,000 each year. Our last payment is in 22-23, so that drops off. We do have a new agreement. I think it's a 3-year agreement the board approved that's at $46,000. So there's a big decrease there. And then also one-to-one devices. We've paid off all of our leases. For a while we were doing leases on our one-to-one devices. We've paid those off, and we're going to try to just pay those out of our funds now instead of doing leases. GASB 87 would be one reason why we want to do that. And then something that's not included in our expenditures I just wanted to touch on. Jeremy talked about the unemployment. That's a big unknown to us for expense-wise. They've got the legislature budgeted $135 million statewide. I have no idea how long that's going to last statewide. So we have not budgeted anything in right now. We'll look at the revised budget. I will say we've had 73 out of probably 110 of our non-certified staff apply for unemployment. So what that all calculates to over 3 months or 2 months, I'm not sure. And we'll have to kind of honestly wait and find out and then see what's covered by the state. So just to touch a little bit on some of the things that Jeremy talked about. I won't go into a lot on the slides that he talked about. The 4% next year, really got to keep in mind then it goes down to the 2% the next year. And then FY26 and 27, although they added help me out, Jeremy.
Inflation rate?
Inflation increase. On those, you can see that FY26, they're projecting a 1.98. So the floor is 2%, the cap is 3%. Again, we don't know where that's going to end up, but I think the important thing is yay, we got 4%. That's really a thing to celebrate. But just keep reality of FY22 going, or 25 going back to 2%. Eller shared this. The inflation, I believe, is updated in December 2022, but the Gen Ed formula increase is updated as of the legislature outcome. So there, just want to point out that the 4% did equal 275 per pupil. And according to this, the gap now for next year between Gen Ed and inflation is about $1,243. You take that times our adjusted ADM of 2516, that means we're still falling short about 3.1 million from inflation. Not trying to be a downer. I'm going to try and do good thing, celebrations, but a little reality. So this kind of shows you a breakdown of what we're getting. You saw the $24.99 as the student count. 2516 is what we're estimated as our adjusted pupil count, because we get adjusted if they come here for a month, we get credit for that. So in the past, at 2%, we would have gotten through about 345,000. At 4%, we're getting right around 691,000. So that's awesome. Again, I talked about the inflationary rate, and then 24, 25 going back to 2%. Compensatory, Jeremy touched on this. This just wanted to show going back. So 2021 was kind of the quote unquote normal year of our compensatory revenue prior to the free meals. It does a 2-year look back. So 2021 was actually 2019 enrollment numbers, and they take a October 1st snapshot. So that was kind of our normal, is right around 2 million. Then the 2 years of free meals, accounts hit, both 2022 and then 2023 this year. We fell down quite a bit in 2022 and then bounced back. And then next year, because of the Medicaid direct certification, and then they're taking our numbers from this year, which was paid, which we got a lot more forms, we're looking at a pretty big jump in compensatory. Our free and reduced count went to 1518 from last year, 1119. Our revenue is going up to a little over $3.5 million. So that is definitely something to celebrate. And from what we know, they're going to hold us harmless on that count for FY25. So Jeremy shared this. The only thing I point out is we'll have a little extra work on our end. The district will have to allocate 80% of the compensatory revenue to the sites that generate it. Each site has their free and reduced numbers and generates a different amount. So we'll have to take that amount and try and fit it into the pieces that qualify. EL, Jeremy talked about this too. The closed gap for the cross subsidy. And Jeremy put it very nicely about how a lot of this money is closing the gap. It's extra revenue, but it's now revenue that we're able to use for the projects or programs, and our general ed doesn't have to subsidize it. So as we look at the revenue, you're going to see the whole number under basic skills. That's how they give us the funds. That includes compensatory and the EL revenue. So when you look at that from 23 to 24, you're looking at $900,000. No, I'm sorry, 1.9.
Don't lose one.
So this breaks it down a little bit so you can see. So our EL original funding for next year without the legislature would have been around $381,000. The increase that they had to help close that cross subsidy was $284,000. And then we talked about the compensatory funds of a little over $3.5 million. So if you look at the bottom, this breaks down what our actual expenditures are for next year. So for EL, we're at $1.2 million. So you can see a little over $600,000 doesn't cover that. Luckily, the compensatory funds do cover our EL and some other areas. So putting our other basic skills expenses into it, it's around 2.9. So we're actually a little under expensed of what the revenue we'll receive. I will say with a little more time, we'll find some programs to budget that expense to. But just wanted to point out, if you look at the total 4.1 million in expenses, and you look at last year, 23, we had 2.3 million. We got some time to make up that difference. Special ed, this was a huge one for us too. Big celebration on the amount of the cross subsidy amount that they gave us. Freelancing it. So this gives a breakdown of each year, and I kind of wanted to break down so you can see what the special ed funding, and this is state and federal, minus what our expenditures are. So in 21-22, we ended up spending a little over 1.8 million out of our general fund to cover the special ed expenses. About the same amount in 22-23, 23-24, that goes down about $500,000. Our increase in special ed state revenue goes up about $900,000, which is great. On the flip side, we're losing about $232,000 in COVID or the ARF special ed. So it's about $700,000 total, but still a great increase to help close that gap. COVID funds, just wanted to give the whole flow chart of what we've been tracking the last 3 years of all the different pots and trying to keep track of what we can spend it on, when it started, when it ends. I put the arrow at the bottom. Our last 2 buckets that we have available for next year needs to be spent by September 30th, 2024. We do plan on spending that in fiscal year '24, so our COVID funds will be depleted after next year. This year, we're estimated to have spent $2.3 million in COVID funds. Next year, like I said, there's 2 buckets left, totaling $1.5 million. So we will definitely use those funds up. So to go over the revenue side of things, not going to hit everything because we've hit some of them, but I did want to touch base on a few. Tuition agreement, that one looks quite a bit lower. What that is we budget expenditures and revenue through the co-op. Some of our federal funds, federal special ed funds runs through the co-op, and sometimes our expenditures, we just take that off the top. They then give us the rest as we expense them. We hired a couple of people last year that used to do the co-op work. So that's where it shows the revenue, but the expenditures also went down that amount. So it really offsets what it looks like. We're losing $105,000 revenue. We're also losing $105,000 in expenses. Not technically because they're employees, but that revenue now moves down to the federal special ed column. Investments, interest for investments. As everybody knows, interest rates are on the climb, and we've been investing some of our funds differently, and we expect to have some pretty good returns on those, and I've already seen that. Just want a side note on the general education aid. You're seeing $471,000. Just keep in mind that that is spread out between some other lines, and then also transportation and capital come out of that general ed education increase. Basic skills, that compensatory and EL, that's the $1.8 million. And then down towards the bottom, we also, this was a direct effect to legislature, the American Indian grant that we received. We received the funds. If we don't spend them, we have to pay them back. That is increasing by $22,000 next year. And then our special ed state revenue, you can see that $840,000. Again, some of that goes to transportation, so you're not seeing the full amount. Levy, I hate to kind of say it is what it is. This is what you guys approved back in December. We're looking at a total of $381,000 increase in revenue there. Our title programs, you're seeing some ups and downs. This one's kind of hard because it all depends on what we have for carryover money. So take Title II. Last year we could add $20,000 in carryover. This year if we expensed it, we're really getting about the same amount of money. We're just not carrying funds over. So that's where title shows an increase. And then our special ed federal funds, we're projecting about a $45,000 increase. That one, again, we receive the money as we expense it, and we also carry funds over in that, just in case they go down from one year to another. And then the last one, the revenue from COVID funds, this will drop off next year. But we had about $735,000 less in revenue for next year, that $1.5 million in COVID funds we have remaining. And then our total at the bottom, the excess is looking at $1.2 million, which is a great number. I would just cautious as we go up to the COVID funds again at $1.5 million in revenue that we're losing. So call it savings to spend next year to try and break even as we go back to that 2%. But a lot of great news, a lot of great things happening here. I think a lot will get ironed out more when we do the revised budget. The revenue projection model that MDE puts out is not available with all the updated legislature. So we piece this together, but we should have a much better look in December of what that's going to look like. And maybe even try and put that revenue side together sooner just to share with the board once that's available.
Is there any issue with the feds on recapturing COVID funding that hasn't been spent? There was some dialogue with reference to that about mid-year. Have you heard anything further on that?
Mm-mm. No, we've we've expensed every pot given to us with what's allowed, except for the two that we were able to use this year. So are you talking, Bill, like anything left over they would redisperse, or?
That they would reclaim.
Yeah, they might be.
They've had that dialogue.
Yeah, I'll say
Federal level.
we won't have any for them to reclaim.
Okay.
Honestly, and this is not about COVID, but those funds were really a lifeline for us the last couple of years.
Absolutely.
I think, Bill, some of that conversations when they're looking at that debt limit and having conversation what to do there, and they were thinking about how are we going to keep functioning. And I haven't heard anything additional from that, but I had heard that initial conversation too.
Transportation fund, just kind of break it down, our contracted services. We're looking at a 4% total increase. Our contract with Southwest Coaches is really only 1%, but with added services, whether it's special ed busing or our regular transportation, we're projecting about a 4% increase. For revenue, again, we're going to see an increase because of general ed aid. Some of that goes from our general ed to our transportation fund, as well as our special ed. We're going to increase that $50,000 out of our special ed funds to cover the expenditures that will increase. So overall, this is kind of an odd number for us. We're actually looking at an excess, even though I have that deficit number there. Maybe it's because it's always been that way, of $10,000. We're projecting an excess. So that's something to celebrate in itself. Our capital funds, just want to point out, capital funds include our capital outlay as well as our LTFM, which is our long-term facility maintenance. Just breaking that down, our capital expense, we're looking at about $119,000 decrease. There's several reasons for that. Part of our one-to-one device leases were covered by our capital and our general, so that decreased. And then also our curriculum in the rotation for next year is not one of our high curriculum cost subjects, so that decreased also. We were unable to, another decrease last year, we had budgeted for a new van. We can't get a new van. They're not making the new vans. That's probably about 50,000 of that's less too. Good news on the legislature side is prior we had 12 years to use vehicles, and then we'd have to get a new vehicle no matter what. And they passed the law that as long as it passes inspection, we can use that vehicle. So we've got some good vehicles with low mileage that we can still use, even though they're reaching that 10 to 11, 12 year. That's why we're going to purchase a new van. I would say if funds allow in the capital, at some point we would want another 10-passenger van because it is used a lot. Sometimes an extracurricular might have to take the two smaller vans, or they could have taken the one larger van. So it is a good thing for the district. LTFM, in the expenditures, we're showing about $608,000, sorry. Should have brought my glasses. And as you know, if you walk around any of the buildings this summer, you can see why that is. We have a lot of good things going on, updating necessary things like flooring and parking lots, etc. Revenue, our levy LTFM went up about 83,000. That was the big move on the revenue side. Overall, we're looking at a deficit of 641,000, a little over 641,000. Again, that's a lot to do with us catching up on some of our LTFM projects. I added this year so you could just kind of see that deficit, how it affects capital and LTFM. On the capital side, really want to try and build that up. Again, with our leases paid off and our one-to-one devices. Todd has been awesome at securing some of these grants for one-to-one devices that pays majority of the student and some of the staff. those funds aren't going to be there forever. So we just need to build that up so we're able to pay for those one-to-one devices out of our funds and not do the leases. LTFM, it looks a little scary as big of the drop as it is, down to 395,000. 395,000, 400,000 is really kind of where we should be anyway. We don't need $1 million of money sitting in our bank when we have projects to do. The good news is in FY25, actually in FY24, our abatement and IAQ bonds that you guys approved will be paid off. And that'll put an extra $475,000 in our LTFM revenue, which will boost that up and again, get our projects done sooner. Keep in mind, we talked about the theater and then also the high school roof project's going to be a big one, hopefully we can push it out 2 to 3 years. So put this together every year. MDE recognizes those 3 funds together as a whole general fund. Marshall Public Schools separates them out, which is kind of nice just to kind of see how we're spending things. Overall, with all 3 funds, we're looking at about $595,000 excess. Food service, first thing I have to do is apologize. I left the expenditures off. The expenditures are going up about 4% or $85,000. That includes our contracted services, food, milk, and equipment. Revenue-wise, again, I don't know. I'm doing my best trying to put things together. Like Jeremy said, we went from paid meals to federal paid meals to federal paid meals to patron paid meals to state paid meals. So you're not going to be able to follow anything off going past. Basically, we know that our revenue increased when we had free meals, so we should be able to see that increase. We've been doing very well keeping up with our equipment district-wide. So overall, I think we'll have obviously a better look when we do our revised budget, but we should be able to maintain either even. We're projecting about a $19,000 excess. And you can see there the trends over the years. 21-22 was a big one with the federal paid meals, one of them with the federal paid meals. Community services, not a lot of movement on community services. Adult basic ed, we're just projecting about $120,000 increase, and that's just in program increasing. If you look over at the actual for 21-22, they were at $2 million. We're expecting that to get back to where it was before. So I think that is a positive, even though I will say on the other side, ABE has been a program that has either broke even year by year with their funding or had an excess. So that increase does not worry me. Revenue wise, you can see the whole total between all programs is about a $23,000 increase. The needle doesn't move much there. Overall, we're looking at a little over $12,000 decrease in community services, which has a pretty healthy fund balance. So, debt service, you'll see an increase. That is the expenditures. That is our principal and interest payments on our debt, and it also includes, I should have flipped, our OPEB trust. So there's an expense that comes out of our OPEB trust every year. And then revenue-wise, levy, we're looking at a $100,000 increase to cover that, along with some state aid. Overall, we're looking at an excess of $311,000. You'll see a little difference from last year. The bond that we just sold in June, we sold at a time where we had to spend down on our debt service to pay the interest, which is kind of it's okay to spend this down, and it's also good for the taxpayers because we didn't have to levy that interest amount. This is the same graph you guys saw when you approved the sale of the last bond, but I just wanted to include it, not looking at the colors as much, but the step downs. You can see we had a step down this year. After 2024 into 2025, we'll see a step down, and then another one in 2027. So I think it's important for our taxpayers to see that we're trying to do a good job of either maintaining or decreasing. So this kind of just summarizes each fund balance. You see the 1.2 in general fund overall, the funds, which isn't really a good thing to look at because you can't spend in other funds. It's 476,000 in excess. And then this breaks down the revenue and expenditures. The percentage is up. You can see our revenue is going up 8.53% in general ed, and our expenditures are only going up 4.7%. Overall, if everything holds true, just remember 22-23 are our revised budget numbers, not actual. 23-24, we're looking at a fund balance of right around 19.16%. Again, I think that is a good thing with the unknowns of COVID, and again, our 2%, returning to 2% to maintain our budget going forward. Any questions?
Very thorough, Deanne. Thank you.
Thanks.